The fall from Grace Vanessa Palmer stood at the edge of the conference room, watching as hundreds of journalists and industry insiders filled the seats of Helix Technologies' annual product showcase. Her reflection in the glass wall showed a woman of quiet confidence. Dark hair pulled back in a neat bun, navy suit pressed to perfection, the small emerald pin on her lapel that had been her grandmother's good luck charm. After 8 years working her way up from project coordinator to operations director, today should have been the crowning achievement of her career. 5 minutes, Ms. Palmer, a young assistant whispered. Handing her a bottle of water, Vanessa nodded, scrolling through her presentation one final time. The Phoenix project had been her baby for the past 18 months, a revolutionary cloud security platform that would change how businesses protected their data. The team had pulled countless all-nighters, sacrificed weekends, and pushed the boundaries of what everyone thought possible, and they delivered. The metrics were incredible. From the wings, she could see Richard Emerson, the CEO, working the room. At 45, Richard had the commanding presence of someone who expected perfection and rarely encountered disappointment. His silver-streaked dark hair and tailored charcoal suit gave him the look of corporate royalty. When he'd founded Helix 12 years ago, the industry laughed at his ambitions. Nobody was laughing now. Ready to make history? Richard appeared beside her, his cologne a subtle hint of cedar and spice. The team deserves this moment, Vanessa replied. They've given everything. Richard's smile tightened almost imperceptibly. Well, let's hope everything is perfect then. The lights dimmed, and the crowd hushed as Richard took the stage. His keynote was masterful as always. Charismatic, visionary, with just enough technical detail to impress without overwhelming. When he introduced Vanessa, the applause was genuine. This was her moment. For 15 minutes, Vanessa guided the audience through the Phoenix platform's capabilities. The demo was flawless until they reached the security benchmark comparison, the crown jewel of their achievement. Vanessa clicked to advance the slide, but instead of the carefully designed graphics, a blank screen appeared. She tapped her remote again. Nothing. A murmur rippled through the audience. Technical difficulties, she said smoothly, if you'll just give us a moment. From the side of the stage, she could see Julian, their tech support, frantically working on a laptop. He shot her a panicked look and mouthed, "The file's corrupted." Vanessa improvised, discussing the benchmarks from memory, but without the visual impact, her words fell flat. When she finally moved to the next section, the momentum was lost. As she concluded to polite rather than enthusiastic applause, she felt Richard's gaze burning into her. The moment she stepped off stage, he was there. What the hell was that? His voice was low but sharp as a blade. The presentation file corrupted somehow. We had 3 backups. Save it. Richard cut her off as reporters began approaching. He smiled for the cameras, but once they reached the private area behind the stage, his facade dropped. 8 years at this company, and you couldn't manage to check a simple presentation file? His voice rose with each word. We just lost credibility with every investor and client in that room. Richard, the benchmarks are solid. The product works. This was a technical glitch that made us look like amateurs. He was shouting now and heads were turning. The entire team stood frozen, watching their leader unravel. This was supposed to be our defining moment, and you turned it into a disaster. Vanessa felt her chest tighten as humiliation washed over her. The team worked incredibly hard, clearly not hard enough. Richard's voice cut like ice. Maybe it's time we reconsider who's leading operations at Helix. The words hung in the air like poison. In the silence that followed, Vanessa became acutely aware of the journalists who had wandered backstage, phones recording every second of her public dressing down. Without another word, Richard stormed off, leaving Vanessa standing alone, surrounded by her stunned team and the silent, watchful eyes of the industry they had hoped to impress. That night, as rain pelted against her apartment windows, Vanessa carefully packed her personal items into a cardboard box. Tomorrow, she would exit Helix Technologies the same way she had entered it, quietly, with dignity, and without fanfare. What she didn't know was that across the city, in dozens of homes and apartments, her team was already setting something in motion that would shake Helix Technologies to its core. Ripples of resistance. The morning after the disastrous presentation, Vanessa arrived at Helix Technologies headquarters at 7:15 a.m., cardboard box in hand. The early hour was deliberate. She hoped to clear her desk before her colleagues arrived, sparing herself the pitying glances and awkward conversations. The security guard, Hector, gave her a sympathetic nod as she passed through the lobby. "Rough day yesterday, Ms. Palmer. You heard?" She sighed, adjusting her grip on the box. "Everyone has." He lowered his voice. "For what it's worth, most folks around here think Mr. Emerson went too far." Vanessa managed a small smile. "Thanks, Hector. It's been a good 8 years." The operations floor was eerily quiet as she made her way to her office. She'd expected to find it empty, but to her surprise, someone was already there. Devin Jackson, her senior project manager, was sitting in the chair opposite her desk. "Devin? What are you doing here so early?" He stood, expression serious. "We need to talk before you do anything." "There's nothing to talk about. After yesterday?" Vanessa set down her box. "That's exactly what we need to talk about." Devin pulled out his phone and showed her a message thread. It included nearly everyone on the operations team and bore a timestamp of 2:17 a.m. "Nobody slept last night. We've been talking." Before Vanessa could respond, the elevator chimed. Through the glass walls of her office, she watched as Priya Sharma from engineering stepped out, followed by Terrence Washington from design, then Marcus Chen from data security. One by one, employees filed in, not just from her team, but from departments across the company. "What's happening?" Vanessa asked, confusion creeping into her voice. "They're here for you," Devin said simply. By 8:30 a.m., the operations floor was filled with employees, but nobody was working. They stood or sat in small groups, talking quietly. When Richard's executive assistant, Olivia, stepped off the elevator at 8:45, she froze, surveying the strange scene before hurrying toward Richard's office. At precisely 9 a.m., Richard Emerson arrived. As he walked through the operations floor, the conversations died. Employees fell silent, watching him pass. He paused, clearly unsettled by the atmosphere, before continuing to his office. 5 minutes later, Devin knocked on Vanessa's door. "It's time." Together, they walked to Richard's office, where Olivia was frantically trying to explain the situation. Richard looked up as they entered, his expression hardening. "Ms. Palmer, I assume you've come to discuss your transition." "Actually," Devin stepped forward, "we've come to submit our notices." Richard blinked. "We?" Devin placed an envelope on Richard's desk. "My 2 weeks' notice, effective immediately." Before Richard could respond, Priya entered and placed her own envelope beside Devin's. "Mine as well." One by one, employees filed in. Senior developers, project managers, designers, even interns. Each placed an envelope on Richard's desk until they formed a small mountain of resignation letters. Some added quiet comments. "I can't work somewhere that treats people this way," or "Vanessa deserved better." By 10:30 a.m., 57 employees, nearly a third of the company, had submitted their resignations. Richard sat stunned, the color drained from his face. "This is ridiculous," he finally managed. "You're throwing away your careers over one incident?" "No," Terrence Washington, the normally reserved head of design, spoke up. "We're standing up for the values this company claims to have. Respect, integrity, accountability. You violated all 3 yesterday." "The Phoenix Project would not exist without Vanessa," Marcus added. "None of us would be where we are without her leadership." Richard turned to Vanessa, who had remained silent throughout the procession. "Did you orchestrate this?" "No." Her voice was steady. "This is as surprising to me as it is to you." "Then tell them to stop this nonsense." "You know what's at stake here?" Vanessa looked around at her colleagues, people who had become friends, who had shared late nights and early mornings, failures and triumphs. "I can't tell them what to do, Richard." "That was never my leadership style." As Richard struggled to find words, his phone buzzed. The director of public relations was calling. News of the mass resignation was already spreading through industry channels. Investors were calling. The board was demanding answers. Vanessa turned to leave, but Devin caught her arm. "You're not going anywhere," he said quietly. "This company needs you, whether he realizes it or not." As the team filed out of Richard's office, the usually imposing CEO sat alone, surrounded by resignation letters and the sudden, terrifying realization that he'd potentially destroyed everything he'd built. The hidden truth that evening, the Helix Technologies offices remained unusually busy past 9 o'clock. In the conference room adjacent to his office, Richard Emerson sat surrounded by the executive team, legal counsel, and HR directors, all attempting to contain the damage of what social media had already dubbed Helix Walkout. The board is considering an emergency meeting, Victoria Lane, the chief legal officer reported grimly. We've had calls from our 3 largest clients asking for reassurance that their projects won't be affected. And will they be affected? Richard asked, massaging his temples. With 57 resignations, including our entire senior operations team and half of engineering? Victoria's expression was answer enough. The Phoenix project will absolutely be affected. We can hire replacements, Richard insisted. Not for this level of institutional knowledge, said Jordan Fields, the HR director. And certainly not quickly enough to meet our contractual deadlines. As the crisis meeting continued, Richard found his attention drifting to the glass wall separating the conference room from the main floor. Through it, he could see Vanessa in her office. Despite everything, she was still there, laptop open, working late as always. Several of her team members moved in and out of her office, despite having resigned that morning. They're still working, Richard observed quietly. Victoria followed his gaze. Of course they are. They care about this company, even if they're leaving it. That's the kind of loyalty Vanessa built. When the meeting finally ended after 11 p.m. with no clear resolution, Richard remained at the table, staring at the stack of resignation letters the executive assistant had organized. On top was a message from the board chair requesting a call first thing in the morning. Sighing heavily, Richard stood and walked to his office. The building was nearly empty now. He opened his computer, intending to draft a statement for the board, but found himself clicking instead on the security camera footage from the previous day. He watched the product launch again, Vanessa's poised presentation, the technical failure, his own explosive reaction. Seeing it from the outside, his behavior appeared even worse than he remembered. He fast-forwarded through the aftermath, watching as the team packed up dejectedly. Most left quickly, but the footage showed Vanessa staying late, working frantically with a young man Richard vaguely recognized as Julian. The new systems administrator. Richard increased the volume. I'm so sorry. Ms. Palmer, Julian was saying, his voice breaking. I was trying to update the security benchmarks with the latest results before your presentation. I must have corrupted the file. It's okay, Julian, Vanessa replied gently. These things happen. But Mr. Emerson, your job, it's all my fault. No. Vanessa's voice was firm. It was my responsibility to check everything before the presentation. That's what leadership means, taking responsibility, not placing blame. Richard sat back, stunned. He scrolled back further in the security footage, watching Julian working on Vanessa's presentation late the night before. The timestamp showed 2:14 a.m. The kid had stayed all night trying to incorporate last-minute improvements. Then he noticed something else. At 6:30 a.m. on the day of the presentation, Richard himself had sent an email demanding updated benchmarks be included. Make sure the latest data is in there. No excuses. Julian had been responding to his directive. A cold weight settled in Richard's stomach. He continued watching the footage, seeing Julian break down in tears after the presentation while Vanessa comforted him. We'll get through this, she had told him. Just learn from it. She had never mentioned Julian's mistake. She had taken full responsibility, absorbing Richard's public rage rather than deflecting it to a young employee who had been trying to meet the CEO's own last-minute demands. Richard closed the footage and leaned back in his chair, the realization of his era washing over him. His gaze drifted to a framed photo on his desk. Himself at 25, standing outside a small office building with Helix Technologies hand-painted on the door. He remembered the early days when every small victory was celebrated, when mistakes were learning opportunities, not career enders. When had he become this person who valued perfection over people? He stood abruptly and walked to Vanessa's office. To his surprise, she was still there, working quietly in the dim light. "You knew it was Julian," he said from the doorway. Vanessa looked up, unsurprised. "Yes. Why didn't you tell me?" "Would it have mattered?" Her eyes met his, unflinching. "You wanted someone to blame. I just made sure it was someone who could weather the storm." Richard stepped into the office, suddenly seeing this woman clearly for perhaps the first time in years. Not just as a competent executive, but as the heart of Helix Technologies, the person who protected her team, who carried the company's values when he forgot them. "I've made a terrible mistake," he admitted quietly. "Yes," she agreed. "You have." The bridge to understanding. By morning, news of the Helix walkout had spread across the tech industry. Competitors were already reaching out to the resigning employees with job offers. The company's stock had dropped 7% in pre-market trading, and Dr. Helix walkout was trending nationwide. Richard arrived at the office unusually early, having barely slept. He found Vanessa already at her desk, reviewing documents with Devon, Priya, and Marcus. They fell silent as he approached. "May I join you?" he asked, more a request than a demand. After a moment's hesitation, Vanessa nodded. Richard took a seat, feeling like a visitor in his own company. "I've spent the night thinking about how to fix this," he began. "But first I need to acknowledge the truth. I watched the security footage. I know what really happened with the presentation." The team exchanged glances. "And," Devon prompted, "and I owe Vanessa an apology." "A public one." Richard turned to her. "But beyond that, I owe all of you a better company than the one I've been running. The question is whether it's too late to build that." For the next hour, Richard listened, truly listened, perhaps for the first time in years. He heard how his pursuit of perfection had created a culture of fear, how employees avoided risks not because they lacked initiative, but because mistakes were punished rather than learned from, how Vanessa had become the buffer between his demanding leadership and the team's morale. When they finished, Richard nodded slowly. "I need to address the company. All of it. Today." By noon, the entire company had gathered in the main conference area. Richard stood at the podium, facing the employees who had built Helix Technologies into what it was. Many looked uncertain, some openly hostile. "Yesterday," Richard began, "I betrayed the values this company was founded on. I publicly humiliated one of our finest leaders over a technical error that, as it turns out, was ultimately my responsibility." He paused, letting the murmurs subside. "In doing so, I demonstrated that I had lost sight of what matters most in any organization, its people." He went on to explain what he had discovered in the security footage, taking full responsibility for the culture that had made Julian afraid to come forward and praising Vanessa for protecting her team member. "Effective immediately, I am appointing Vanessa Palmer as Chief Operations Officer, with a seat on the executive board and full authority to implement the changes needed to rebuild our culture. I'm also establishing an employee council with real power to hold leadership, including me, accountable." A cautious optimism began to spread through the room. Richard continued, his voice growing more personal. "When I started Helix 12 years ago, I believed success came from driving relentlessly toward perfection. What I've lost sight of is that true excellence comes from creating an environment where people can take risks, make mistakes, learn, and grow." He paused, looking directly at Vanessa, "where they feel valued as people, not just for their output." After the meeting, Richard sat with Vanessa in his office, the air between them fragile but clearing. "Will you stay?" he asked simply. "That depends," she replied. "Was that just a speech to stop the bleeding, or do you really mean to change?" "I meant every word," Richard said. "But I know trust is earned, not declared. I'm asking for the chance to earn it back, from you, from the team, from everyone." Vanessa considered him for a long moment. "Why did you found Helix in the first place? Not the answer you give investors, the real reason." The question caught Richard off guard. He hadn't thought about his original motivation in years. "I wanted to create something meaningful," he finally said. "Something that would make a difference. And the people who help you build that meaningful thing, are they just tools to achieve your vision?" "No," Richard said quietly. "They are the vision. I just forgot that somewhere along the way. Vanessa nodded slowly. I'll stay, not because of the promotion or the apology, but because I still believe in what Helix could be. She stood to leave, then paused. And Richard? The rest of the team will need more than words. As she walked away, Richard sat alone in his office, contemplating the long road ahead. Rebuilding trust would be harder than building the company had been in the first place. But for the first time in years, he felt a clarity of purpose that had nothing to do with market share or innovation metrics. That night, he drafted a personal email to each employee who had resigned, acknowledging their courage in standing up for their values and asking, not demanding, that they consider giving Helix one more chance. A new Chapter 3. Months after the walkout that nearly destroyed Helix Technologies, the company gathered for their quarterly all-hands meeting. The mood was markedly different from previous gatherings, less formal, more collaborative. Employees spoke candidly about challenges and solutions, with senior leaders, including Richard, listening attentively. Of the 57 employees who had resigned, 49 had returned under the condition of a cultural reset. The newly formed Employee Council, with representatives from every department, had real authority and a direct line to the board. Most significantly, Vanessa Palmer had stepped into her role as COO with a clear vision for rebuilding not just the company's products, but its soul. As Richard prepared to close the meeting, he looked across the room at the faces of the people who had given Helix a second chance. Before we wrap up, I want to share something personal, he said, setting aside his prepared remarks. 3 months ago, I nearly lost everything that matters. Not just this company, but the trust of the people who make it what it is. In trying to build something perfect, I created something fragile. In pursuing excellence, I forgot compassion. He paused, gathering his thoughts. My father was a factory foreman for 40 years. He measured success by production numbers and efficiency metrics. When I was 10, I overheard him telling my mother that sentiment has no place in business. I think I've been trying to live up to that my entire career. The room was silent. Employees watching this unfamiliar side of their CEO emerge. What I've learned, what you've all taught me, is that my father was wrong. The strongest businesses are built on precisely the sentiment he dismissed: trust, respect, empathy. The courage to stand up for those values, even when it's difficult, especially when it's difficult. Later that evening, as most employees headed home, Vanessa found Richard still in his office, reviewing the Phoenix project's latest metrics. The platform had finally launched the previous month, exceeding expectations despite the delays. You've changed, she observed, leaning against the doorframe. Richard looked up. I'm trying to. He gestured to the chair across from him. Join me? I could use your perspective on these adoption numbers. As they worked through the data, Richard found himself noticing things about Vanessa he'd overlooked before. Her incisive analytical skills, certainly, but also her quiet humor, the way she considered problems from angles he'd never think of, how she spoke about team members as individuals rather than resources. What? Vanessa asked, catching his thoughtful gaze. I was just thinking about how differently we see the world, he admitted. You've always led with your heart. I've always led with my head. Both are necessary, she replied. Companies need vision and metrics, but they also need humanity. Their working sessions became a regular occurrence, evenings spent discussing not just business strategies, but philosophies, experiences, occasionally even venturing into personal territories. Richard spoke of his divorce 5 years earlier, how it had hardened something in him. Vanessa shared stories of her grandmother, a small business owner who had taught her that leadership was service, not authority. 6 months after the walkout, Helix hosted a celebration for the Phoenix project's success. As employees and their families mingled, Richard found himself gravitating toward Vanessa, who was deep in conversation with Julian. The young systems administrator had blossomed under her mentorship, recently earning a promotion to senior security specialist. Mind if I interrupt? Richard asked. Julian tensed slightly. Old habits died hard, but offered a genuine smile. Not at all, Mr. Emerson. I was just telling Ms. Palmer about the new security feature I'm developing. It's brilliant, Vanessa added. We should include it in the next release. After Julian moved on, Richard and Vanessa found themselves alone on the office balcony overlooking the city. The evening air was cool, the sky painted with sunset colors. "We've come a long way," Richard observed. "We have." Vanessa leaned against the railing. "Though there's still work to do." "There always will be." Richard turned to face her. "That's what makes it worth doing." Something had shifted between them, a mutual respect that had deepened into friendship and perhaps something more. Neither had acknowledged it explicitly, both acutely aware of the professional boundaries and the complicated history they shared. "I never properly thanked you," Richard said quietly. "For what?" "For staying. For giving me the chance to become better." He paused, choosing his words carefully. "You once told me that respect isn't about power. It's about remembering that people matter." "I think about that every day now." Vanessa smiled. "You know what I think about every day? Something you said during that first meeting after the walkout, that excellence doesn't come from driving toward perfection, but from creating an environment where people can take risks and grow." She turned to face him fully. "That goes for personal relationships too, not just business ones." The implication hung in the air between them, an invitation to risk something new, to step beyond the carefully constructed professional relationship they had rebuilt. Richard hesitated, then took a small step closer. "I'm not perfect, Vanessa. I'm still learning." "I don't want perfect," she replied softly. "I never did." As the celebration continued inside, they remained on the balcony talking about possibilities, for the company, for themselves, for a future neither had imagined 6 months earlier. Nothing was certain except that whatever came next would be built on a foundation of mutual respect and understanding. In the end, it wasn't dramatic declarations or grand gestures that healed Helix Technologies, but the daily, quiet work of remembering what truly mattered. The company that emerged from crisis was stronger not because it had avoided failure, but because it had learned how to fail with grace and rise with compassion. And for Richard and Vanessa, the journey of rebuilding a company had unexpectedly become the journey of building something even more meaningful between themselves. Proof that sometimes, when everything seems to be falling apart, it's actually falling into place.